Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, Greece, the winners and the losers. Despite what they say, there is money for the bankers, but nothing for the Greek people who face a decade of austerity. Also, the people of Myanmar find their voice to protect a little bit of paradise from becoming a big bit of infrastructure. And from pearl trading to the world, we meet the Alfardan family, shaping one of the world's fastest growing economies. So, Greece got its bailout. Default's been avoided until, well, the next time. The situation is still so far from satisfactory, but perhaps the oddest thing was the release of a confidential report just hours before the deal was struck, detailing exactly why it wouldn't work. See, the problem for Greece is the Troika, this is the IMF, the European Central Bank and the European Union, has very little faith in Greece actually delivering on its promises. They cite a lack of action on past austerity measures, things like tax collection and labour reform. But it's not the Greek people who stand to benefit from the bailout, which begs the question, what's it really all about? We will try to answer that in a moment, but first, that confidential report we mentioned. The deal was based on a projection that Greece's economy would, as you see, contract 4.3% this year, have flat growth next year and then grow about 2.3% in 2014. But given the age of austerity, that's pretty optimistic. All of those numbers are actually. But even with that outlook, the report doesn't think the Greek goal of a 120% debt to GDP ratio is actually realistic. In fact, it has a tailored downside scenario. That's the second number here, the ratio that would peak at 178% in 2015 and decrease only to 160% by 2020. Still huge numbers. Now, right now, Greece will get its $170 billion bailout money, but it's still not enough. If you take that last scenario, Greece would actually need a bailout of, it comes to $326 billion, that's 245 billion euro. Even under the most optimistic situation, it would still need another $66 billion, 50 billion euro, by the time the decade is out. So in the end, you have to forget about bailouts, really. So much will depend on the success of austerity and of reform. But try using the word success next to austerity around Greek people these days. They're not going to buy it. Have a look at this now from Tim Friend, who found yet more ways austerity is biting in Greece, this time down on the farm.
It's tough out here. 150 kilometres north of Athens, workers harvest the crop in a muddy field. By the time it gets to market, the farmer will barely break even. The Greek economic crisis has hit urban and rural life alike.
Giannis. Dimitris.
3 generations have worked this land for the past 70 years. Sheltering from the rain, one of them describes their hopes and fears for the future.
There is a big problem for us, because the lack of infrastructure raises the cost of production. Because our land is scattered, we need more fertilizers, pesticides and workers. We also need petrol for our vehicles to water our crops. And we're paid less for our products because there is less money in circulation.
Giannis is also the deputy mayor. He would like to see more cost-effective cooperatives like this in an area where unemployment is running at 20%.
Farmers here insist that they will survive, but it's going to be tough going for many years to come. Future generations can only hope that the economy eventually becomes good.
For now, the family and the land are their only strengths. Tim Friend, Al Jazeera, Mavroya.
So then who's the real winner in this round of bailout negotiations? Certainly not the Greeks themselves. None of the 130 billion goes towards helping them. In fact, and this is the part that really stings, most of it goes directly to private investors and banks. Take a look at the math. These numbers come from Reuters. You start with the 30 billion euro sweetener to the international bankers for accepting a debt swap. There's 35 billion euros that goes to Greece to help buy back bonds. You've got 5.7 billion euros in interest payments. 23 billion euros goes to the Greek banks. All told, about 94 billion euros, or 72% of the bailout, goes directly towards financing a bond swap with private investors. That reduces debt. It does not reduce suffering. Now, the bondholders are complaining. They've taken a 50% haircut, as it's known, and lost 75% of bond value. That is based on what they would have got if the bonds actually went full term. Is this also an admission that Europe's banks are too big to fail, or at the least, far more important than the Greek people? But let's go back to those bondholders. How many of them expected full repayment when they bought those bonds, dirt cheap, and with astronomical interest rates? And how many were in fact banking on a bailout in the first place? Some answers now with Patrick Armstrong. He is a Greece bond investor and a managing partner at Armstrong Investment Managers. Right. Patrick, thank you for your time. You bought Greek bonds about a year ago, I believe. Explain to our viewers why you did that.
When we bought the Greek bonds, it was a calculated bet that the EFSF at the time would provide a structure which would allow Greece to pay back its bonds in full, ideally. We bought bonds that mature in March, the next maturity, and bonds that matured in August last year. And as a hedge, we shorted the banks against it so that if we didn't get paid on our Greek bonds, we knew the banks would suffer. So we made good money shorting the banks as well. So it was a bit of a speculative position.
What do you make of the EFSF fund now? Back then it was AAA rated, great, but you know, a year later.
Now, yeah, a year later it's a very different situation. So the austerity cuts that were planned from Greece didn't materialize. The growth, the hope for growth from Greece didn't materialize. It's actually a much deeper recession than people were forecasting a year ago. So it's got to the point where you inevitably do need a PSI and a significant write-down on this debt now.
Right, so now we're into this territory of bond swapping, and again, I believe you're at least reluctant to participate. Again, why?
Well, I think we probably will be forced to participate. So the question is, on a voluntary basis, we won't be participating. It's a bit of a risk-return trade-off. If we do participate, we get the same as everyone else. If we don't participate, we'll essentially probably be forced to participate. They'll put in a collective action clause where all the people who do hold out, as long as there's a threshold of 66% who do it voluntarily, the tail will be forced to receive the same terms as the other 66% who do participate. And as our bond matures in March 20th, there's a chance we get paid back in full because they may not get the collective action clause in place in time. So there is a potential upside for us by not participating.
Okay, in that answer you talked about holdouts. Any thoughts on the sorts of numbers who might actually hold out on this?
Well, I think the banks will participate, so that's probably about 50% participation you'll receive just from the various banks that do hold this. I think you'll probably get about 50% of the remaining 50%, so probably 70 to 75% will participate, and there'll be about 30, maybe 25% holding out would be our guess. Okay.
In the end, Patrick, this comes down to, and we can talk about funds and bailouts and whatever, you can use whatever terms you want. In the end, this is about taxpayer money. Are you, if I can use this word, comfortable with taking taxpayer money for your bonds?
Well, that's taxpayer money. It's the government of Greece that's issued the bond with the promise that they'll pay this bond back. So that's what you do. That's how capital markets function. When you borrow, you should anticipate that you will pay back that loan. And it's the government and it's the taxpayers who support the government that have taken that money from people who provided the capital for those loans. So the way the capital markets work, you should pay back on the debts you take.
Oh, yeah, I guess that is how the system works, fair enough. If we can move on to Italy, Patrick, because you've gone on to buy Italian bonds. Some might look at that and say, well, why go down another risky path like Greece clearly was? So again, explain to us, why go for Italian investments now?
Well, Greece was a much more of a speculative position where we shorted banks against the position, knowing that Greece was insolvent, but there might be a mechanism that allowed it to pay back its debt, and we would win on the short banks against it. Italy, completely different situation. Italy is solvent. Italy isn't spiraling in a downward debt spiral. Italy, as long as its interest rates stay below 6%, is a solvent nation, and it will be able to manage its debt. So based on liquidity, it pushed interest rates out as wide as in the high 7% in November and December, and that's where we bought Italian bonds. We've actually been reducing our position now as the Italian 10-year yield has fallen to about 5.5%. So on a 12-year bond, we've made about a 20% return in 2 months. And we think it's about fair value right now, but do see risks of potential contagion coming from Greece. The LTRO happens at the end of this month, so that'll support some buying. But we think there are risks that yields could widen, although we do not believe Italy is insolvent.
Yeah, but not just the issue of insolvency, the issue of politics and leadership too. So many of Europe's problems have been perceived as a lack of leadership. And in response, I guess, Italy ended up going down the technocrat route. Does that give you faith, at least in the short term, about the direction Italy is taking?
Italy's taking good concrete steps. They do have a very large debt as a proportion of their GDP. They have more debt than they have economic activity every year. So that's one risk, but they do have a lot of structural things working for them. Their interest rates, as long as they stay below 5%, they've got a technocratic government in place that is taking fiscal austerity measures that is putting it in a good framework right now. So as long as Italy's GDP doesn't contract significantly, it is on a good footing where it will be able to meet all of its debt repayments.
OK, Patrick, just finally, let's do some crystal ball gazing, if you wouldn't mind. I want to go back to Greece. Two things. Can it avoid default? And can it avoid that huge pain and logistical nightmare of actually leaving the euro?
I think that's a 50-50 right now. Greece, right now, what they've got in place with their next 130 billion euros they'll be receiving is a bit of a stopgap that'll see it through the next couple of years. And if Greece continues on a downward trajectory in terms of economic growth, it will be forced to do something, maybe leaving the euro, maybe a harder default. And if there is a scenario where it can generate some form of economic growth, it will get to a sustainable path. So the IMF forecasts are that it brings its debt to GDP down to around 121% by 2020. That is very optimistic. If they do achieve that, Greece will be fine. But I think the growth assumptions behind that is probably too optimistic. So this 130 billion bailout won't solve Greece.
And actually, while we are talking bailouts, just any thoughts on any other countries which may need bailouts in Europe? I'm thinking Portugal, obviously.
Portugal is the one at most risk. Ireland's done a very good job, seems to have turned itself around. Italy and Spain, we think, barring a significant slowdown in economic growth, are fine. Portugal is in a bit of a precarious position and may need more funds. Percentage-wise there, I think that's almost a 50-50 as well, that if Portugal gets through this year with any type of economic growth, it'll be on a more sound financial footing as well.
All right, Patrick Armstrong there with his insight into Greek bonds and bailouts. Thank you, Patrick.
You too. Thank you.
To Myanmar now, a country we increasingly hear about as it slowly opens up its doors to the world. And as it does, the really interesting stories start to come out, like the villagers who are speaking out against a massive industrial estate being built on their land. Wayne Hay takes up the story now from a coastal village near Dawei.
After decades of isolation, Myanmar is full of hidden treasures. They are natural and economic, and in the case of Dawei, both. During almost 50 years of military rule, parts of Myanmar like this were largely cut off from the outside world. Now the outside world is about to be welcomed here, and in the process this place will be transformed forever. Plans for a deep-sea port here came about 10 years ago. Now things seem to be speeding up with a partly civilian government in charge. The port will be the gateway to a $50 billion industrial estate being built by a Thai construction company. The people who have lived in this remote area for generations haven't seen much change in a very long time. Now 23,000 of them must leave to make way for the development.
And he must move. Sure, he must move sure. Of course, we will construct the industrial estate, so he must move sure. He don't accept our negotiation. We will negotiate other way.
Those affected are being offered compensation in the form of houses and land in other areas. But most in this village aren't happy about having to leave. And as a sign of the country's political changes, they now feel brave enough to speak out.
When
we get to the relocation area, we will be given a smaller plot of land, so we won't be able to plant our crops, and we won't be able to survive. We'll face many problems.
Replacement employment on the project site doesn't seem to be an option for many. Only a handful have found work there so far. The villagers now gather regularly to discuss the development, and last month they won a significant victory when the government scrapped plans for a massive coal-fired power station because of environmental concerns. The machines continue to move in, but they may face more opposition from an emboldened population eager to protect its way of life. Wayne Hay, Al Jazeera, Dawei, Myanmar.
You might remember we reported a few weeks ago on how South Africa's President Jacob Zuma was planning to create 5 million jobs by the end of the decade. A lot of scepticism about that because, for one, unemployment is running at 24% at the moment. Plus, 1 million jobs have been lost since the start of the recession in 2009. However, Haru Mutasa has found a factory in Johannesburg that is managing to buck the trend.
They hope their skills will always be in demand. These tools are used mainly in the mining sector. 120 people work in this factory, up from just 18 about 10 years ago. Glenton Rebello believes making goods locally creates sustainable jobs for the country's growing number of low-skilled workers. Investing in the country's growing transport sector is one example.
When we build the Transnet trains and stuff like that, I hope they're built here, because that will mean there will be jobs and skills that are put in, because you can't build a train without skill. And even if you take low people and you grow them within that environment, when they're finished building those trains, they're going to have some skills.
It's what government says it's going to do. And in his annual budget speech, the finance minister says investing in infrastructure development will create employment and an average economic growth of about 2.7% this year. Africa's biggest economy has lost 1 million jobs since the recession in 2009. Job creation is a priority. A lot of money has already been spent on infrastructure, and South Africa has some of the best facilities on the continent. But corruption and the misuse of public funds is a big problem here. Another challenge is finding the money to pay for it all. Taxes could be one way, but in a country where the gap between the rich and poor is one of the largest in the world, it may not be a viable solution.
You can always identify need from a political point of view, but you can't always extract the resources, and we're already seeing in Europe the crisis of effectively promises made to electorates that exceed the ability of the tax base to actually deliver.
Sectors like health and education still depend heavily on state funding, and many South Africans struggle to cope with rising food and fuel prices. President Jacob Zuma has ambitious plans, but a simple solution could be giving entrepreneurs some money to start businesses and create much-needed jobs. Haru Mutasa, Al Jazeera, Johannesburg.
Finally this week, something from our own backyard. We've outlined many times how Qatar's astronomical rise has much to do with oil and gas. But before that, what was there? How did the old Qatari economy function? In a word, pearls. Diving for and trading natural pearls is how this country began, and it hasn't disappeared entirely either. This week we want you to meet the Alfardan family, which will mean something to our viewers here in Qatar. They are ranked one of the richest families in the region by Arabian Business magazine. As we found out, those pearling roots are still very much there. They are like any other family, only they're not in this town. Hussein, Ali and Noor, 3 generations of the Alfardan family, synonymous with big business in Qatar. The key, though, is there's no oil and gas in sight. The thing that's made Qatar rich is not part of the story. We start with Hussein.
Depending on our living in the past is on the production of the pearl. The year we have good production, or that means we have a good income. That means we have a good life. Whenever the reduction in the whatever we can find that year, we have a problem.
Remember, Qatar started life as a pearling nation. That was the entire economy. Hussein remembers what happened when the industry struggled during World War II and big oil came to town.
All of us, we tried to find a job, because when the oil companies came, then banks has come, and then there are opportunities. The divers left diving and joined the oil companies. They work as a labor.
Not him, though. He persevered with the jewellery business. Just one store, which, figuratively at least, remains at the core of the business. His son, Ali.
I mean, when we started, it was always pearls and jewellery and watches. So all the other things came later, but we are always proud of our traditional. So we consider pearls and gold and you could say little diamond pieces from our traditional, because as you know, people here when they get married, this is the most important part for them. This is the first thing they think about.
But you've got to worry about BMW and Rolls-Royce cars and properties, the Kempinski Hotel and your towers and all these things. I mean, it's, the point I'm making is that your type of business, it's not just one thing. It's, I mean, actually, how many elements are there approximately?
Well, maybe about 8. You could say, between real estate, hotels, banking, automobiles, many other fields. But this is you know, all the others you could have a system and it's running. Like the hotels, you have a management who you sign with, for instance, let us say St. Regis or Kempinski, and they take care of the management. But this part of our business, it has to be always, your touches is there. You have to be present there. You cannot have it as a system or a management to deal with that. You have to have your input. You have to have your touches in it.
So you feel you can hold on to that element, that personal touch, that family touch, even whilst you expand into all of these other things? You can keep...
This is the most important for us. That's why we enjoy our business, because of those touches.
But these days there's so much more. Alfardan's made its money, $3.42 billion at last count, by being an exclusive supplier. That means managing a dozen car brands, including BMW and Rolls-Royce, a dozen jewellery brands, the likes of Chopard and Longines. Throw in a major property portfolio, marine businesses, plus currency trading. The Alfardan Group would be influential in any setting. So, what happens next? Well, Ali's daughter Noor has joined the family business as a jewellery designer. But don't suggest to her it's some sort of free ride.
It's not that easy. There are obviously a lot of expectations. A lot of people think that it's very easy to just get in and continue what your family's been doing. My grandfather has worked really hard to build something really amazing, and my father has carried on from then and expanded the company, as have my uncles, and then it's up to the next generation to add something as well. We can't just go in and expect to continue things the way they are. We are continuously looking to grow.
And your father and grandfather are happy with the direction you're taking?
Yes, they are. I am really lucky and happy that I have their support as well.
So it'd be a big change for them as well, with the tradition and the tradition of the country as well, the pearling industry where it started. I guess it started from very humble beginnings, and now it's this.
Well, yes, exactly. And again, it is something, as I said, I wasn't just going to go into the company and just continue everything the way it was. I wanted to expand, I wanted to grow. Nudar is part of it. And Nudar is basically part of what me, as my generation of the family, can do to add to the company.
Nudar is Noor's own collection, the result of a degree in gemology and an immersion in the jewels business from a young age.
I'll give you an example with this piece. This is based on the kaf, which is a very traditional piece of Arabic jewelry. And I made this piece and wore it when I went to the States recently, and someone came up to me and said, "Wow, are your gloves made of diamonds?" And I said, "Well, these aren't gloves. This is a traditional piece of Arabic jewelry. This is what Arabs know as the kaf. It's a very traditional piece of jewelry, something that was seen very much in traditional jewelry." And but to the international market, or to the Americans that I met, they saw it as gloves, and so that's actually why this piece is called fingerless gloves, because this is what they considered it to be.
Her next plan is to shift production from its current base in Italy to a specialist facility in Qatar. Another sign that this business, this very family business, despite its huge expansion, knows where it came from.
So I use this one, but I see in one side, but I don't have the loose pearl which we used to have.
That's what you would put on the other side.
See, we use this scale as it is and try to make it equal. Yeah, it's heavy a little bit. So when he go out from the house, he carry it like that. And he goes wherever he sees somebody want to sell, take this one, put it on the ground.
Shop. The shop is open.
Separate and make the weight.
Yeah.
And that's all.
Brilliant, brilliant, thank you. Yep, fascinating family they were as well. That is where we're going to leave you for this week on Counting the Cost, but if you want to get in touch, here's how to do it. On Twitter, @KamalAJE, that's me. Our business editor is @AbidOliver-Arling, and if you're not on Twitter, email us fine. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. While you're online, head over to aljazeera.com/business. You hit the CTC link at the top of the page. All our episodes are up there in full for you to catch up on whenever you'd like. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.